Our first keynote speaker this morning, we're very fortunate to have him with us. He is the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Services, U.S. Department of Commerce. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome James Sullivan.
So good morning. I do want to just quickly acknowledge, I have to say the Trojan Marching Band is probably the best warm-up that an official from Washington could possibly hope for. If this is what constitutes kickoff activities at USC, I think we're going to have to reevaluate what we do, maybe borrow your playbook for our conferences in DC. It is my privilege, it's a real privilege to be here today and back at the Supply Chain Summit. This is actually my second summit. Last year, I was about a month into my job, and my staff had made the recommendation that this is a must-do event, and I, being a newbie, effectively exceeded. And I have to say, this year when the invitation came in, I proactively sought it out, and I recall cornering Nick in the library at the Department of Commerce to make sure that I still was welcome, so thank you again for the invitation. I guess over the last year in my role at the Department of Commerce, I have seen time and time again how the work that supply chain professionals do in maintaining and innovating the nation's supply chains really is critical to our competitiveness as a nation in the global economy. And the Department of Commerce. And now I feel like I'm back in DC again. So. I'm saying, the department is extremely proud to have USC as a strategic partner. My purpose today is basically threefold. I think, or at least I thought it would be beneficial to explore with you the administration's trade agenda, to give you a sense of what it is we're trying to achieve. Second, I'd like to be a little selfish and talk about what we in my office at Commerce do, both in partnership with USC and with industry in general, the supply chain industry on a larger scale, to support efficiencies in our nation's supply chains. And then finally, I do want to say, and I hope I can make this clear, this is not just a platitude. I am here with one of my colleagues to listen. There are a number of incomparable thought leaders and participants here at this summit, and we want to learn. We want to learn what the future of U.S. supply chains will look like, and what we in government should do, or perhaps not do, to help realize that future. As this audience really knows better, I think, than most, and as Nick so adroitly spoke to just a few moments ago, the supply chain community really does play a unique role in the nation's trade agenda. Supply chain professionals populate every industry, from automobiles to agriculture to digital services, and they really do tend, at least in my experience over these last 13, 14 months, they tend to have a very wide-ranging and uncommon understanding of how the economy works and how various industry sectors interact. Here in Los Angeles, I should say, and I was talking to Gene Soroka a bit earlier about this, I think the supply chain community is also something of a bellwether for the national economy as a whole. A few weeks ago, for example, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal. It had reported that container imports at both the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach had risen almost 8.5% in June compared to the same month last year. And the results for the port of Oakland were comparable. That increase in container imports told us something on the one hand about demand strength in the U.S. economy, but it also highlighted, I think, some very valid concerns about, among other things, the pending tariffs on Chinese products. including the potential implications for the holiday retail season coming up in just a few short months. So I would like to try to speak to those concerns today by elaborating a bit on the trade agenda for the administration. And I'd really like to start with why. Why this agenda, why this approach? As we all know, without giving too long a history lesson, after World War II, the United States, working together with like-minded partners, set about building a global, rules-based economic order. At the heart of that order was a commitment to the rule of law, to free enterprise and free trade. And unfortunately, in recent decades, we have helped to expand the international trading system to countries that do not always share our values. Some nations have exploited the international institutions that we helped to build. They espouse free trade rhetoric, they exploit the benefits of free trade, but they adhere only selectively to international rules and agreements. Instead, some often sell their imports in the United States at less than fair value through a practice known as dumping. They employ discriminatory non-tariff barriers. They employ forced technology transfers and state subsidies to help them gain unfair economic advantages. And the reality is that these actions and measures threaten our economic growth and prosperity and our national security as well. One example, I'd say, Chinese theft of intellectual property alone, for instance, costs the U.S. economy upwards of $600 million annually. And the administration does not think that we can continue to kick the can down the road on these very real and very stark challenges. So I guess the next question is, how then does the administration propose to stop others from exploiting the international trading system? And how do we propose to ensure free, fair, and reciprocal economic relationships? First of all, as everyone I'm sure knows, we're working to modernize existing trade and investment agreements like NAFTA and KORUS, which is our trade agreement with South Korea. The administration certainly recognizes the importance of the North American supply chains that have grown up around NAFTA and their role in making U.S. industries competitive on a global basis. This NAFTA modernization process has enabled us to work towards a very high standard trade agreement that recognizes some important 21st century realities. A new NAFTA will, for the first time, for example, include a chapter on digital trade. Again, keeping in mind NAFTA was originally crafted in 1994. We're also working to ensure that other chapters covering telecommunications, financial services, intellectual property, and cross-border trade and services are similarly updated to facilitate trade in the internet age. We have now held 7 rounds of negotiations over the past year and seen some significant progress on numerous issues. And I think now, with the recent Mexican presidential election behind us, the administration has indicated that it will work closely with Mexico and with Canada to conclude the NAFTA negotiations as soon as possible. With regard to South Korea, the administration has secured a number of key improvements to KORUS, again, the free trade agreement that we have with South Korea. These improvements will help increase U.S. exports and grow jobs. Among other things, Korea is committed to removing barriers to U.S. auto exports. They're eliminating onerous customs verification regulations, and they're ending discriminatory pricing practices in the pharmaceutical sector. So that's sort of bucket one in terms of what the administration is looking to do. A second administration strategy has been to counter the unfair trade practices that we see distorting markets, disadvantaging American businesses and consumers, and undermining our sovereignty as a nation. I spoke a moment ago about the theft of intellectual property by China. To address this, which is a long-standing concern, acknowledged by both parties, the administration has, as everybody knows, imposed tariffs on Chinese products used for robotics, for information technology, and aerospace, and these are all areas where China is advancing rapidly, largely with the help of unfairly acquired U.S. intellectual property. To prevent further dumping of foreign steel and aluminum into the U.S. market, the President has also announced a 25% tariff on steel imports and a 10% tariff on aluminum imports. And to address unfair pricing and subsidies by foreign countries, the Department of Commerce has initiated 120 new anti-dumping and countervailing duty investigations just over the last 18 months. So we are seeing positive outcomes. We're starting to see some positive outcomes from all of these efforts. We are continuing to engage in constructive discussions with our trading partners, and we are encouraged by the measures being initiated by U.S. allies on steel and aluminum. Last week's announcement by President Trump and European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker basically to renew U.S.-EU trade cooperation really was, I think, a potential game changer. In the joint statement that was issued after their meeting, the U.S. and the EU agreed to work together toward zero non-tariff barriers and to zero subsidies on non-auto industrial production. They also agreed to increase trade in services, chemicals, pharmaceuticals, medical products, and soybeans. And as part of that process, the EU will purchase more U.S. energy, and both the U.S. and Europe will begin a dialogue on standards in order to ease trade, reduce bureaucratic obstacles, and slash costs, which I suspect is probably music to the ears of most supply chain professionals, or at least the ones I know. In addition, the U.S. and the EU have agreed to join forces to better protect American companies from unfair global practices by, for example, reforming the WTO and addressing IP theft, forced technology transfers, all the things I just mentioned, industrial subsidies, and distortions created by state-owned enterprises and by overcapacity. A third approach is our work to create the necessary conditions for U.S. firms to take full advantage of the ever-growing digital economy. Right now, the U.S. exports about $400 billion annually in digitally deliverable services, with manufacturing exports through e-commerce sales topping about $3.4 trillion annually. The digital economy supports 5.9 million American jobs, or 3.9% of total U.S. employment, and these are the well-paying jobs of the future. In 2016, American workers earned, on average, about $66,000 a year. By comparison, digital economy employees earned $114,000. In the e-commerce space, the administration is pressing our trading partners to raise their de minimis thresholds, which would significantly reduce unnecessary paperwork and delays for U.S. firms and boost cross-border sales. We have a situation where small businesses are now creating about 2 out of every 3 jobs, so raising these thresholds really will help small businesses gain vital access to consumers abroad. Our team, if I could brag about commerce for a moment, is also leading on several initiatives to support U.S. industry participation in the global e-commerce market. We executed, for example, a memorandum of agreement with the Department of Homeland Security to collaborate on addressing e-commerce trade challenges. On our end, we leverage our long-standing relationships with supply chain stakeholders, and then we provide that insight and expertise to DHS to make sure that they can better balance, on the one hand, national security concerns, but on the other hand, supply chain efficiencies. In the World Customs Organization, we're working with private sector organizations like the U.S. Chamber of Commerce to ensure that the recently released e-commerce framework on standards document does not disadvantage U.S. shippers in areas such as content and transparency, but most especially on data protection. We're supporting framework efforts to combat counterfeit and pirated goods, and we're working towards a globally harmonized customs approach to ensure speedy delivery of parcels across borders, while again maintaining safety and security for all the companies involved. In the WTO, the World Trade Organization, the U.S. has agreed with its trading partners to explore prospects for a plurilateral agreement that would establish rules for the digital space. The U.S. is seeking a relatively ambitious effort that addresses some of the more urgent market-distorting practices we've already encountered and see, unfortunately, on a rising basis, such as foreign data localization requirements. Going forward, our guiding principle for a future rules-based system for e-commerce will be transparency, fairness, and simplicity. I do want to fully recognize, and the administration does as well, that for supply chain policy decisions to be effective, we have to work very closely with the private sector. The better the inputs, the better the outputs. That was our principal motivation behind our strategic partnership with USC. USC is obviously a recognized center of excellence in this field, and our close relationship with Marshall really does keep us looking forward to the frontiers of supply chain innovation and our shared goal of end-to-end digitization. In the past 2 years, for example, 2 of my team members will participate in the 3rd annual hackathon here at USC, which I understand will be a little later this year, and I was here for last year's. Another way that we try to ensure policy reflects business realities is through our advisory committee on supply chain competitiveness. This is a very exceptional group of leading supply chain professionals. It was chartered by the Department of Commerce to provide advice directly to the Secretary of Commerce on steps that the U.S. government should take to improve the global competitiveness of U.S. supply chains and, by extension, the U.S. economy. This committee was recently rechartered by Secretary Ross earlier this year, and I am very pleased to announce we prevailed upon Nick to join this distinguished panel. So thank you, Nick, for your willingness to serve. We count ourselves very lucky to have you. As you would expect, and I'll be quick because I see I'm getting the 1-minute sign, there is a substantial list of supply chain issues on which the Secretary will need to seek advice from this committee. On infrastructure, which is a key priority for the administration, our supply chain team has been working very closely with the committee on issues related to financing, digital innovation, and permitting reform. On barriers to maritime competitiveness, the team has convened some very extraordinarily productive conversations with stakeholders here at the ports of LA and Long Beach, and at other seaports, including Seattle, Tacoma, New York, New Jersey, and Baltimore. And we hope to conduct more such visits in the near term at other ports. We're also looking closely at the industry comments on everything from the harbor maintenance tax to the Jones Act, both the pros and cons of that issue. On workforce development, which Nick alluded to, we know that talent shortages in the supply chain have been a cause of concern for several years, and in 2016, our advisory committee recommended that Commerce take a leadership role in convening the federal government and federal agencies to help accelerate effective supply chain workforce development and accessibility. Just last month, the President issued an executive order establishing the President's Council for the American Worker, and the Department of Commerce is to chair that council. We're just gearing up, but we really do view it as a timely opportunity to bring federal agencies together to address the workforce needs and opportunities in the supply chain sector. In a few hours, I'm going to cut my blockchain remarks short. I know Nick, we're going to all join Nick in the launch of his book, Making the Case for Blockchain as a Foundational Supply Chain Technology. I think, again, most people know this, probably better than I, but with 1/3 of manufacturers and retailers expected to adopt blockchain for product tracking in just the next few years, and with this global blockchain market projected to grow to a staggering $7.5 billion in 2022. We are certainly watching policy developments around the world very closely on this issue. Just very quickly, to that end, we've already added one blockchain expert to our advisory committee. We are engaging with the European Union on the European Commission's new blockchain observatory, and we are rapidly building our stakeholder network to ensure that we stay abreast of the new groups and alliances that seem to crop up and emerge on a weekly basis. Before I close, I do want to reiterate what I outlined at the outset. In addition to explaining some of the administration's priorities and its agenda and my office's work on supply chain issues, I am here with one of my colleagues from the Commerce Department to listen and to learn. I think we can all agree that efficient, well-functioning supply chains are critical to virtually every sector of the modern economy. So I hope you will all take advantage, perhaps during the breaks and during the networking session, to let us hear from you about how you think government can help in that regard. So thank you. I've gone a bit over. I apologize. I do thank you for your attention. Again, I thank you for the invitation to be here. It truly is an honor to be at this event and to hear from so many accomplished leaders and so many innovative companies. Thanks again.